Hi, everybody. Colin here. Our feed for 40K is going really well podcast wise. Our YouTube channel is doing great. We've got all of these different fantastic shows coming out, and I have one more show to add to the mix. When we were originally starting Best in Tabletop, one of our core competencies core values that we talked about was inclusivity. Was making sure that everyone felt like they were part of the tabletop community, whether they are whatever ethnicity or sexual orientation or whatever they happen to be. Part of that is that the America likes to really focus on America for tournament coverage, and so one of the things that we did on purpose is we brought Innis into Fight Club because Innis is very in the European 40K scene. Well, we still have a whole nother part of the world that hasn't been handled. So I have found four fantastic human beings that would like to talk to you guys every other week about Australia, New Zealand, Asia. They'd like to tell you about crazy, weird metas around the world that you maybe haven't heard about. They're going to talk about what lists work there. They're going to interview people. They're going to just kind of cover that part of the world. And one of them is going to be playing competitively 40K in Korea, which should be really interesting to hear about. So these guys are going to be in the feed every other week. There's going to be a YouTube video if you want to watch them while they're talking to you. It's going to be up every other week. And then we're going to have one more show that's going to come in every other week, rotating with this one, so that the feed always has a show on Thursday. It'll be Frontiers this week, and it'll be something else next week that I'm not going to tell you about right now. But for now, I want to welcome to the Best in Tabletop Network, 40K Frontiers, and it goes a little something like this.
And welcome to 40K Frontiers, a brand new podcast on the Best in Tabletop Network. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And we are going to be here completing the picture of 40K outside of North America and Europe with a little boots on the ground kind of style feel, talking about the meta, the community, how we actually play 40K down here, so compared to some of the listener questions we've had already. And just generally give you an insight and maybe even like help abolish some of those rumors and stuff about the crazy meta outside of those countries, and potentially maybe even backing them up. So who knows how that's going to go. My name's Ben. I'm being joined here by Alex, Sam, and another Alex. Alex, why don't you, Alex Taus, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself? I've already derailed it already, lads.
First, yeah. Ben's just like, I'm not important. I didn't even talk about me. So I guess I get the fun job being up first. I'm Alex Taus. I am the New Zealand reporter or something for the show. So I'm from Christchurch, New Zealand. And yeah, I've been playing 40K for over half my life now because walked past the GW store, thought, hey, that looked cool. And many years and dollars later, we're doing this. So yeah, I play predominantly in Christchurch, New Zealand. At the moment, I have bandwagoned from Knights to Custodes, which are the two low model count elite armies that I have because, yeah, things are expensive here. And I started back into 40K after a hiatus at the start of uni. Yeah, where are we going from here? So I also play sort of around New Zealand a little bit, starting to travel. I think that's the gist about me. So let's go, I guess, to Sam next.
Yeah, so hey everyone, so I'm Sam Lemin, so I'm from Canberra, Australia, so a part of the ACT, so if anyone needs to know, it's a pop trivia question. Canberra's the capital city of Australia, so yeah, I've been playing off and on for actually quite a little while, going back and forth, so started when I was a wee lad in like the Lord of the Rings comics, if everyone know about that, and then stopped and started like the traditional Warhammer 40k story or Warhammer player story, stopped and started, but then since the tail end of like university, college, got back into it, playing a lot more consistently, and then started playing competitive games literally last year. So last year, my first run of tournaments and getting into that sort of feel, and then now this year, as we'll talk about a bit later on, started into the tournament organizing and growing the community side of things. So yeah, it's been a great journey so far. Love it. I'm a massive fan of all things evil and not so good. So Tyranids and Dark Eldar are my two loves in life for sure. And then starting to expand a bit more into all things, fun and chaos, and so maybe chuckle a little bit, maybe some good stuff in terms of Eldar. So join that hype train. And then, So that's all about me. I'll hand it over to our second and most important Alex.
Well, I appreciate that you're going to make me the most important Alex in here. If y'all can't tell from the voice, I'm the token American attached to this podcast. I'm actually moving to South Korea here in a couple months. So I was asked to come on to give that perspective. So a little background on me. I started playing 40K when I was in middle school, introduced to it at Dawn of War was my point of entry, like a lot of people. And dabbled around with Space Marines as is required of like a 13-year-old starting Warhammer. And then I picked up Imperial Guard. Played Guard for a very long time until I realized there was a phase of the game that I wasn't participating in. That phase was combat. And I moved over to playing Chaos, Death Guard specifically, which I played for the last couple of years. And so played that for a little while. Really liked elite, low model count stuff, kind of heavy infantry focused, a lot of defensive tech. So I've recently jumped both feet onto the bandwagon and right into Custodes, which has given me that back to playing Imperium and playing some heavy infantry with defensive tech. So that's where we're at. So that's where I'm at in 40K. I'm moving there in June. I'm actually on the road right now for work, so that's why you're getting hotel quality audio. Before we jump too much, as is tradition of a newly started project, you've had a little bit of a stumble, and Ben didn't get a chance to intro himself, so we're going to jump back there real quick, and then I'll give my my moving and packing stories. So Ben, if you want to intro yourself, we'll make this a lot easier.
Yeah, I just got a bit excited talking about you guys, and I just wanted to get the spotlight off myself, I think, a little bit quickly, just so. But hey, I'm Ben. I'm an Englishman who moved to Australia like 17 years ago now, so pretty much Australian. That's what I always say to the Aussies anyway. So I live in Newcastle, which is about an hour and a half, 2 hours north of Sydney, in Australia, and I have probably been back into 40K since the beginning of 8th edition. I did dabble a lot in fantasy when I was a lot younger, and kind of got, teased back into 40K. Ever since I got back into it, has literally consumed me. And I have been like a sponge, absorbing as literally as much as I can as hold. That's led me to get involved with the local community a lot, trying to help build that up, and run tournaments, run leagues, and stuff like that. And I just can't get enough of it. I generally play GSC, Tyranids, and Sisters. I have dabbled in, I would say, a lot of armies before that, but none of them have really caught me like these ones have, and a bit of Blood Angels too. So yeah, I enjoy clawing people's faces off in combat. That's my main love. But yeah, I enjoy all the tactical parts of 40K and the camaraderie that comes in the community as well. So I love it. So Alex, why don't you tell us a little bit about you moving over to Korea, and kind of how you picture and that community being, and what kind of moves you've already made there to kind of suss it all out, if you like. So
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, I'm moving to Pyeongtaek. It's a city south of Seoul, which is the capital of South Korea. And I'm moving there from eastern New Mexico. So when I found out about the move, I reached out actually to Innes of Fight Club fame, and he got me in touch with their WTC chat. As an American, traditionally, I don't care about 40K that doesn't happen in my country. So I had to learn about that, learning what the WTC was. So I've gotten a hold of them through an app called Kako Chat, which is their kind of social media messaging app. I was not expecting, excuse me, I meant Innes A. Wilson from Twitter is the appropriate title for him. But I was not expecting the amount of people in that chat that I found. Eastern New Mexico has some 40K players. It's not a 40K hub in the country, so there's not as many people there. But there's a lot of people in Korea that play, both expats from a lot from the United States, some from down under Australia, New Zealand, and a couple Spanish players, which really surprised me. Seoul is an international city, so there are people from all over the world playing in that area. So there's a lot of different people there. There is a language barrier, as there would be. It is a completely different language. Does not share characters with English at all. So the universal language for 40K in Korea seems to be English, from what I can tell. Um, Time zone changes make it a little hard to talk with them, but I've been working a lot to be like, hey, I'm moving to this area, and the guy who is their rep for that part of Korea effectively reached out to me and said, "Hey, you're moving here. Let me know if you need anything." I know the move's a little farther out, um, but got me in contact with the local community down there, which is really good. I'm learning more and more as I can about the meta in Asia, which is not something that is talked about a lot. I know Goonhammer has written a little bit on Tokyo Tactical, which is the large GT in the city of Tokyo in Japan. As someone who's used to traveling 8-10 hours for events to go to GTs, a 2-hour plane ride from Korea to Tokyo is not that bad to play in a GT. So that's really where I've been there, looking for stuff.
So may I ask, like when we spoke about before doing this show, you said that you'd sussed out that there was quite a bit of league play over there.
Yeah, that seems to be, and if I say this wrong, I am not going to be offended if a Korean listener comes back and says, "You are completely wrong. You are out of your depth," because I'm okay being wrong. But from what I can tell, it was league play mostly because of COVID. Um, South Korea has taken the pandemic very seriously and has had a lot of lockdowns, which limit the amount of people you can have in a space for activities. So tournaments makes it difficult. Uh, League play is a lot easier, and people will do like league nights. I'm talking with them; they are planning on running events, but that's more of a they need COVID restrictions in Korea to open up to allow that to happen. So right now, it's a lot of either league play or just pickup games. Seems to be the flavor of the time.
So that was the good thing about leagues, it can run at its own pace. So that's what's great.
Yeah. And sort of, so that's like super interesting. And this is sort of one of the things we sort of wanted to do this show about. So obviously, US Alex is transitioning to South Korea and then exploring that Asian meta. And like he pointed out before, as an American, not to be on stereotypes, but America's focused about the Americas and not really much else about the world. And so this is what the show's about. So 40K Frontiers is fundamentally going to be about the wide west and wide world of 40K and exploring those foreign metas universally. Obviously, you hear about the Australian, New Zealand meta a bit more in these days and how wacky and weird they are, but exploring to even wider areas such as South Korea and Tokyo and Japan and other areas such as Singapore and other like more foreign areas such as South America and South Africa. We're looking to try and explore, and this is what the show is going to focus on about through so as we'll cover about here soon, some tournament coverage and how we've been doing ourselves as players or even hosting events ourselves, but also doing interviews with key prominent players in these areas. That's the plan of what we want to do for this podcast and channel.
Yeah, so like after same time as LVO, right? There was suddenly the biggest GT or the first GT or something in South Africa. Something like that would be the sort of thing. While like Fight Club will be talking about the LVO because they're there and it's like in America, so it must be the most important thing. We might go and try find someone from this like big thing that's like really awesome to talk about happening in South Africa. Sorry, I'm getting really confused. And get an interview. Say, hey, this is like what happened and what was involved in running the event, that sort of thing.
Well, and I think if you look at that too, one of the interesting things, the stories that unfortunately got buried a lot about that South Africa GT, it was won by Death Guard. As a as a Death Guard player for a little while, that's really impressive. At the same weekend that's going on, I'm in Vegas playing Death Guard, just getting crushed. It is a mental workout to play that army now because you are very slow and you don't get to make mistakes because you're not fast enough to make them to make them into opportunities. So it's stuff like that that really interests really the hosts of this show, that we want to see. We want to see what's going on in 40K in other parts of the world where Alex Taus mentioned sometimes there's like budgetary or supply constraints on 40K that the United States doesn't have that issue, A, because they can get everything, or everyone just will 3D print bits if they need them. That might not be an option in other parts of the world. So metas are going to be shaped by that. And I'm sure we'll talk about that later. So I'll cut myself off there.
We're talking about lesser known areas. Taos, there's the first bit of shade thrown over from Australia to New Zealand there. But you've got a very big tournament on this weekend, right? You've got like it's New Zealand Team Championships. That's right.
Yeah, it's something with like championship and teams in New Zealand in the name. I can't remember the specifics. It's on down at Appearings, and so yes, I am meant to be packed or packing for that. I'm flying out tomorrow, and yeah, it's run by the Kraken Wargaming guys. So that's at minimum, Dan, Finn, Michael, and Hayden, they have a podcast as well that goes over New Zealand 40k stuff, Krakencast. And so quick plug. But yeah, their event is we were looking at getting up to 14 teams of 5. This was the original plan was 12. 2 signed up at the same time. We found a 14th, and then since then, New Zealand has been getting a bit of a speed run or crash course in like, oh yeah, COVID is not fun when like you can't keep it out of the country. So there's a few drops at the moment. We're looking like 10 teams of 5, so still a pretty solid showing. And yeah, so I'm part of nominally I'm the captain of the team coming up from Christchurch. So there's 5 of us, sorry, traveling up for that. Hoping to, yeah, show that down here we're still, solid players. Myself and John, another player on the team, had in the past traveled up to an event in Wellington in place of Masters, and we went quite well there. So some of the guys up north started to take a bit more notice.
So how far are you actually having to travel for this tournament, Alex?
Oh, I actually am not sure about the distance. There's like an hour-ish, hour and a half flight, I believe.
So you're
So
going
I'm
from the
flying from
South
yes,
Island up to North Island, right?
yeah. So I'm flying from halfway down the South Island of New Zealand, and up to near the top of the North Island. Uh, yeah, from Christchurch, biggest city in the South Island, to Auckland, largest city in the North Island. Um, yeah.
So how are
So
you feeling about your team competition? Like what issues have you been having? Obviously there's the COVID stuff up there, but there's also, you've got a bit of travel to do with your armies and stuff up there. And as you said, there's some good teams going. What have you guys been doing to prepare for that in terms of games and stuff like that?
so there's been a few things. I've been, let's say, educating the rest of the team about like, hey guys, this is Custodes. They're real good now. So hopefully a couple of guys that it went a bit poorly against on the team will be aware. Don't do that if they peer into them at the event. So that's part of the prep. Some of the guys are painting because the event's not today, so we've still got models to paint. Um, and then there's a whole flying with models thing that we're all working our way through. This is my 3rd time flying to an event, and so a 2nd time with my Custodes force. So I'm reusing some of that sort of deal, which we're quite privileged in Christchurch that we've got a great club that hosts tournaments about every month and a half on average. So usually it can just be chuck things in the back of a car and drive for half an hour at most, which a lot of Americans will probably laugh at. That it was a big deal when the local commission painter lives a bit out of town, and so there's this event 45 minutes drive away, and a whole bunch of people need to go, oh, we need to get up like a bit earlier and plan a drive and carpool maybe. So yeah, we're learning things that a lot of Americans will probably laugh at us for needing to think about.
Well, that's the challenges, living in a place which just has less people, right? And less of a community. There's just less support there, less players. And you just got to make sure you can do your part to keep your numbers up from like your gaming buddies and stuff, and keep on attending those to give them support, I guess. So
Oh yeah, for sure. Because there's like 2 cities in the whole island that have tournaments, and maybe I'm being unfair to the Dunedin guys, but I think they have one main tournament. And so this is a city 4 hours south from where I'm at. Um, yeah, and so they'll regularly come up or have a contingent coming up to our events, usually taking away the best painted trophies. Um, and otherwise, the tournaments are all on the North Island. So we've got like we don't have a massive country, but it's like there's a bunch of sort of discretized metas because of just different views on travel and things like that.
yeah, so I mean that's something that I've got a good friend who lives in New Zealand, and he's an absolutely fantastic painter, and he says that I was actually speaking to him this morning, and he made the huge call to say that New Zealand hobbyists, and even I think they reckon that he reckons Australian hobbyists too, but I think he might be pushing that a little bit. Have got some of the best hobbyists out there, and certain there's a lot of the people at the top tables generally he reckons have better painted armies, the ones that he sees on stream and stuff like that. So it's a big call, but yeah, he reckons there's some great hobbyists over there, especially in New Zealand. So you know I have actually seen some of the armies that you guys have been putting out, and they're absolutely incredibly looking. So
But yeah, you just touched on there before, and we sort of alluded to before as well. But like the armies themselves, though, are relatively traditionally limited in like I guess variety and style. You always hear that take that normally Australians and New Zealanders they play one or two armies because legitimately we can't afford more than that. So Taos yourself, so AdMech basically whatever the US price would be, it double that for New Zealand is basically what the price is. And then traditionally in the past, it cost more dollars than it did points for a GSC force fundamentally. And it might be the same for like old school AdMech was the exact same way. So do you know, like, is it much, do you see that a lot, Taos? Or is it very similar, like just focused on the one's armies? Like you basically, when I guess you talked about the Kraken Wargaming guys, obviously they're a bit more developed, but traditionally other teams, they'll be like, oh, okay, we know this player. So John, he's going to play this army exactly all the way through. There's very little variety. Look, not everyone's like, obviously your Sean Nate and stuff, they're like a faction expert, but traditionally, funny enough, in these metas, you normally play one or two armies and that's basically it.
Yeah, so like well, it's not just an AdMech thing, right? The general go-to is there's a price in US dollars. I double that number next to the dollar sign. That's a New Zealand dollar price. It makes me real sad. But yeah, no, it does. Like definitely where I'm at in Christchurch, we've got a handful of sort of top players, and they usually do pretty well, regardless of a little bit regardless of the meta, and they'll usually play their own faction. Like I basically only have knights and custodies. And John, one of the guys on the team, has bugs, and basically that's it. Another guy has orcs, and that's about it. And so we're a little bit fortunate in that like two of those factions for sure are like quite strong. We're going to have a bit of a rough time locally because Tau's real popular, and yeah, and so something about that book and being good, I hear maybe that'll be something fun in future events.
72% is fine, I hear anyway, isn't it?
Yeah,
So,
something like that.
so
Did I actually answer your question there, Sam? I got a bit
yeah, go for
derailed.
it.
Yeah, you
Alrighty.
did fine, man. You did fine. You answered my question very well, so you're all good, bud. So yeah, like sort of what's some sort of expectations you have for the tournament? So obviously it's a couple of days away. It's a 5-man team event. I mean, to be fair, you talked about it before how it's a small event, but 50 people, so 10 teams of 5 is no small feat. I mean, that's traditionally like obviously old school GT status in terms of number of people. So do you have any expectations heading into the event? Is there like some key teams or players you're trying to knock out or beat along the way?
So the Kraken guys were sort of the team to look out for from up north that we knew about, but they've, I believe, committed to splitting up, and they're going to be mercenaries to help fill slots in teams that have had players drop due to the government telling them to stay at home and isolate type deal. And they were something to look out for. Otherwise, there's a degree of we're not the most familiar with. There's a few other teams I can't specifically remember names where we've had a bit of a look out for. And in our team meeting, we sort of went up saying we think that trying to go for the podium is a pretty fair goal for us to have. Like we're a lower population base down here, but we're sending sort of 5 of the best players we can up. Yeah, so we've got we're optimistic, but also trying to be realistic at the same time and not going really confident and get just rolled first round.
Not losing
Well,
first round is always a goal for many people. Let's be real.
Yeah.
So no, we'll look forward to hearing how you go. So the plan for this show is, by the way, everyone. So we look to try and release these fortnightly. So every 2 weeks we'll roughly have a show, and for the time being they'll be all recorded. So sadly it won't be live just for the time being until our American Alex gets to move to South Korea, and we'll be obviously covering that journey along the way. But from then we'll start to look to try and cover them live, and then. Yeah, so for a bit of a plug, so obviously we're part of the Best in Tabletop Network, and so you can show your support to the Best in Tabletop Network by subscribing on Patreon. There's a $10 American tier, which gives you access to the Discord and other benefits along the way. So obviously there's going to be paywall content here shortly from other shows, and then we'll soon obviously have some paywall content along the way. And it gives you access to the Best in Tabletop Discord, which is fundamentally, I mean, obviously we're all 4 of us are from that Discord, and we've learned. I've personally grown a lot, and then I'm sure everyone else can attest to how great it is. And we're not just trying to blow smoke up. Blow smoke. Fundamentally, this is legitimately a very, very good Discord with a bunch of people on there who are very experts in their field and know everything. So if you want to sign up, it's patreon.com/Best in Tabletop Network, or Best in Tabletop. Sorry. So yeah, I guess. Yeah, sorry. Ben, I guess moving from here. So obviously Alex has got his event this weekend, but this past weekend, I know you hosted actually a GT sort of status with a bunch of people. So do you want to talk to us about that?
Yeah, for sure. I was lucky enough to run the Down Under 40K GT. Down Under 40K is I don't know what you'd call. We still don't really know what we call ourselves. Like community building kind of initiative, I guess. In New South Wales, located around the Hunter region in Newcastle, like I said. And we ran our first GT this gone weekend, which is really exciting. We were lucky enough to have some big lapse of COVID restrictions a couple of days before, a relax of COVID restrictions. So that was really fortunate for us. It did only end up being 40 players because it's, there's still enough restrictions that people have got to stay home if there's any issues. So we went up with 40 when we did have 50. And yeah, it was super exciting. It was actually the first player placed terrain event in Australia, which I think is worth pointing out. So that was really, really exciting. We had to do some serious deep diving on making sure, because player placed terrain as a information sheet, when you read it and you read the LVO one, you read any of the FLG ones, all looks really straightforward until you try to apply it to your own terrain. So that was really exciting, working all out and just trying to figure all that out and get that sorted. And we were lucky to probably be one of the only GTs in the world in the weekend that didn't have Tau or Custos win it. So that was pretty exciting. So the winner.
You guys tried though.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So basically, so the final was two very well known Australian players, especially one of them, Matt Morosoli. He's part of Art of War. So you guys would have seen him on Meta Monday. He loves a bit of that. He also loves doing the Drukhari stuff and the Chaos stuff. He was actually running Tau for this event. And he played the final against Chris Wright, who's a former Australian #1 ITC. and extremely good player in my actual meta as well. So I've played him a fair few times. I still haven't got a W against him. Get flattened, rolled by Chris Wright. They don't call him the Terminator for nothing. And he played solely in the last round on Abandoned Sanctuaries. Uh, and there was, even though we thought Matt Morrisoli had won it, it turns out there was actually a mistake. And there's something I'd really like to highlight. They The players both approached me about 2 hours after the GT ended and spoke to me about a mistake, which would have been a primary swing, which would have ended up with Chris Wright winning by 1 point. And it was actually incredible. Like, I've TO'd like a lot of RTTs and a lot of events, and done a couple of Ironmans and stuff like that. And to have the two players have basically already discussed, so both of these guys are on the Australian WTC team, and they both discussed what happened in the game. They'd obviously gone through it in meticulous detail, and they both approached me asking me if they could obviously change the scores because the Chris should have won, not Matt. And we I just think the way that they handled that was a massive example to everyone at who not only just attended the Down Under 40K GT, but just any GT in Australia or in the world, really. The way they handled it, they came to me, and obviously my goal as a TO that weekend was just to make sure that everything was done correctly and that everyone was happy. And when the guys had basically felt like they'd done my job for me, had come to me and requested me that we've got the score wrong, we've sorted it out between ourselves. I made sure both parties were happy in the group chat. They were more than happy. And so yeah, I've applied to get that result changed. But as you would have seen on like any sort of stats sites and the FLG article, shout out to Nathan. He has corrected that and put Chris Wright as a winner. So that was pretty exciting, and was really, really just an amazing end to the weekend, So
Well, and I think that's interesting that you talk about that, where you only had 40 odd players there. Do you think that that sort of contributed to that, where you have such a small community that it's kind of everybody knows everybody? There's no bad blood anywhere. We're here to play with toy soldiers. So that's
yeah,
really how you get to that result.
yeah, I think that's you're totally right there, Alex. I feel in Australia it's a massive country, and 40K has the growth of people playing the game and the way that the game has been approached has matured and grown so much in the last 3 years. Um, Even like probably about a year before Ninth started, has gone absolutely bonkers over here. And obviously, the emphasis from overseas and the emphasis from over here on sportsmanship has been a huge thing there. Those guys being on the same team for Team Australia has obviously makes a whole nother world of difference to that. But just the morality and the quest to make that right from those guys made it feel really good. I'm quite fortunate in this kind of end of Australia to actually probably be one of the more bustling areas of Australia when it comes to 40K. It's certainly one of the more busy areas, but we still Matt Morrisoli had driven 11 hours to come to that tournament. Now, I did say to him, "Why didn't you fly a plane?" But he said, "Oh, he had to drop something off in Sydney in his way." But that's an 11-hour drive, and there's a lot of the guys who came from the tournament had driven, 3 hours or so to get there. So that's still not like round the corner, but I still feel like the community's a lot bigger, but the distances are massive. So
Mhm. Well, that's something you don't hear about that in the States, or most certainly in Europe. You don't hear about people traveling 11 hours for an event, with some exception, right? Like people fly from all over the States to get to LVO. That's not 11 hours unless you're
no.
driving. If you're flying, that's four or
It's
five.
also not a 40-person tournament either.
Yeah, it's not a
So
40-person tournament. You're not driving
yes.
11 hours to attend a 40-person tournament. And I think uh, for those of you watching as YouTube content, uh, we went through photos of the event there, and to make excellent audio content and talk about pictures. Um, Looking at that as somebody who's played in GTS in the states, all over the country. I've played in GTs in Washington State. I've played in Texas, played in New Orleans, played or in Louisiana, Mississippi, Florida. I've played in California. Um, if you didn't tell me this wasn't Australia, I wouldn't know. And it's stunning. So there's absolutely gorgeous terrain, and good on you, Ben, for running this event, because this sounds great. Um, if I might have to, uh, the wife is talking to me about when we're in Korea, maybe try and sneak our way down south for a little bit. So I might time it with a GT. She understands. This will be fine.
Yeah, that'll be fine. That'll be fine. We'll get something sorted for sure. So yeah, that was really exciting. It actually was, believe it or not, one of the reasons why we reckon that we actually dropped from Honestly, which was about 56. So we had to. So this was a postponement from last year, because it was in October and it just wasn't. That was when COVID was. We had our Omicron outburst in New South Wales, so we couldn't run it there. But we actually, there was another tournament that was meant to be ran at the same time, and that actually got postponed and re-released on the same weekend as us. So that was about three. Oh, no, it's not. It takes about 5 hours to get there, and it's like literally directly west from where I am in Australia. And that had I think that ended up with 48. I think it was, and that was Battle in the Bush. And so that was two nice sized GT events in literally with only 5 hours. And honestly, it pulls a lot from the same community. So we had 90 players approximately playing from the community that weekend, just in GTs, which is actually really quite big for New South Wales. New South Wales has definitely picked this game up in our community in terms of running a lot of events and stuff like that. And that was actually won by Custodes, and that was won by a good friend of mine actually. So he went over there and won that. So he was really happy with that. And now that's called Battle in the Bush. For people who don't know, the bush in Australia is just in the middle of the sticks, in the middle of nowhere. So would you say that was accurate, Sam? That's the description of it.
Yeah, 100%. The outback, as you know it. So
Yeah.
So Battle in the Bush here just means in the outback, in the wilderness. So for people who don't know, so this was held in Orange, New South Wales. So funny enough, it's sort of like known as like a bit of like a wine country, sort of similar to blanking on the name right now, but it doesn't matter. Anyways, it's like a very rural town, like very small city, like maybe 50,000 people, maybe. I don't know. Actually, might be a bit bigger than that, but
I don't reckon it's that many.
20,000 maybe. Yeah, okay. So pretty
50,000 at like the best. That's a high estimate.
With GT
day. With a GT there, yeah, it's 50,000. But so it's a very small town in the grand scheme of things, and they hosted a GT, and it's a bit of a shame. Obviously, they sort of coincided with Down Under 40K GT, because otherwise, as you alluded to, people would be at one GT or the other, and like would be a massive event. So. But yeah, on the screen, we have photos from the event, so just from a couple of the rounds. So just scrolling through, and so sadly the Custode meta couldn't stay safe everywhere around Australia, so Custodes took it out, as Ben alluded to, and then but then we had a bit of a difference. So we had, I guess, Drakari, so Hayden Ford, congrats, won the GT at Battle in the Bush, and then Jack Lavacombe came with Drakari and came second for this one. So yeah, and then I sadly have forgotten who came third. Do you remember, Ben, who came third?
No, but I'm pretty sure, wasn't it one of your ACT boys?
Will? Yeah, well, maybe Will. Apologies. So, and then Will with Tao. So,
yeah, it was Will.
Yeah, Will with Tao came third. So, no, there's some good sized events over this past weekend, and and credit to the event, we'll give it due. So, a month ago or so, they had an event, and so like similar, I guess a lot of tournament organizers are facing it, and I'll allude to it here shortly about terrain. So, fortunate enough in Australia, traditionally we've had sort of like a WTC style terrain in terms of how things are going, but TOs have had to innovate and try and change things up. So obviously Ben talked about player place terrain having to be incorporated, and this event in the previous the TOs for this event in a previous event had to criticize a little bit for light terrain, and they were able to reach out and gather more terrain. They've greatly improved, and so the struggles of TOs trying to gather terrain is obviously felt worldwide. It seems, and so yeah, obviously we'll try and cover where terrain is shown. So hopefully these images give it a bit of justice in terms of what was expected and what was shown. So yeah.
So that was awesome to touch on a bit of New South Wales tournament activity. Sam, why don't you tell us about your first foray into running a little event over the weekend, and tell us a little bit about because you obviously mentioned Jack and stuff at Battle in the Bush as well. You had tell us a little bit about ACT 40K and some of those guys, because you're the rep from that area and you're also the captain of the team. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that and your RTT and the community and stuff in Canberra?
Yeah, sure. So, sort of one of the things I alluded to earlier on is I'm still relatively new to this, but so we've been a bit of a strange scene that we're relatively small. So in Canberra, we're relatively small, but we're a growing community, and I guess one of the innovations I want to try and do is help grow that community and foster a good environment. It's a bit of a shame in previous iterations, and maybe this has also felt worldwide, like 7th and 6th edition, there were sort of tournament players are seen as whack players, so like win at all costs type of people, and it sort of put a bad feel in the taste of like just a bad overall feeling for players that tournament players would be horrible to play against and just nothing good comes from a tournament. And so we're trying to reinvent that. I've obviously been fortunate enough to receive nothing but good games at my tournaments, and so we want to try and grow that and develop this community and show that tournaments aren't for whack players and people can enjoy their tournaments over the time. So I ran my first actual real in-person RTT this past weekend. So as sadly Ben alluded to, we had actually a lot of Canberra players who would traditionally come to our tournaments be at the major GT. And so I was fearful that fundamentally that we wouldn't get enough players to run the event. But thankfully, a lot of fresh new places came up, which was fantastic to see. And we had 17 people do the RTT. And we actually even had it live streamed. So thank you to Scotty D49 on Twitch. He live streamed the event and was able to cover the top two tables. So last round 1, round 2, and round 3. And so we had 17 people play, and then I myself as a TO had the buy round to give people a go. And so it was great to teach a bunch of people about how tournaments sort of work and how things go. And we didn't hear a single bad complaint over the event. So it was fantastic to experience and see. And so, yeah, we at the end, so it was just a small 3-round RTT. We won't cover these, but obviously for me as a TO, it was sort of a good experience to get a feel for things. And obviously a very stressful day for anyone that's been a tournament organizer, but it was good to see that things ran smoothly. There wasn't any real issues, nothing too crazy in terms of judge calls to be made. And at the end of the event, we had a Jakari player win the first place, and then Death Guard come in second. So you'll be proud, Alex. And then in third, we had T-Sun. So all chaos, chaos seeing some sunlight in Canberra at least. So it was nice to have.
Well, he's a man after my own heart because again, running Death Guard is difficult, but it's a good time. You can have a good time. There's good things to be had in Death Guard. Don't worry about me switching to Custodes. That's not an issue. So,
Yeah.
Sam, I actually do have a question for you there because you said and this is looking at smaller metas in Canberra. You mentioned that a lot of the major players that would have played at the event were at the GTs. And we said, normally we're not going to try and focus a lot on RTTs, but I think that actually does give some interesting insight because you had all of your new players playing independent of the big fish. The small fish got to go out and play in the pond for a little bit. Did you notice any trends there? What were newer players starting to pick up on there? Was it pretty diverse, or was there a focus on one thing or another?
Yeah, it's sort of funny. Good question for sure. It's sort of funny. In Canberra where we are, funnily enough, like Space Marines for whatever reason are just popular. Like I guess obviously the Easy Army people are interested in, and they enjoy all the different colors and flavors. But definitely a lot of the newer players had Space Marines. So you saw on the screen there was an Imperial Fist player. He was a new guy. Then there was a Dark Angels player that played the last round, was a new guy as well. And then there was another definitely Blood Angels player who was brand new as well. So that's what we sort of see generally some like hobbyists who love the Space Marines and get involved is that. But yeah, it was sort of good to see obviously the smaller fish come out and enjoy themselves. But there's not anything too wacky and wild other than basically sometimes obviously in a meta we just don't get players. Like fundamentally when we had obviously the AdMech insane run, we just didn't have any AdMech players at all, like just in Canberra, because we have like a pool of maybe at best in times 30 players in tournaments, like in locally, like in a city of 500,000 people. So we had 30 tournament players. So
Mhm.
yeah, we didn't get AdMech, like was one thing, or an Orcs. Like, so you might have seen on the screen, there was actually one Orc player, and that was the first time I've seen an Orc player in the whole time I've been here. So we avoided all the buggy spam, which is nice, and then now we get them a bit tamed. So yeah, but we're interested to see how they develop and grow. So obviously, I like to think we'll help grow the community and we'll develop more and more and more and grow, get further and further. And maybe it'll be a bit more diversified, but for the time being, it's definitely going to be very unique. And you'll see things like Death Guard and T-Sun's podiuming events.
No, and that's very that honestly is very interesting. As somebody who's moved around the United States a lot to play in different areas, I can tell you that kind of regional meta thing always fascinates me. Really,
Yeah.
figuring out what's played in certain areas. I can tell you that when I've played in Texas, it's Space Marines, and it's Space Marines of different flavors. But by hell, they are wearing power armor, spikes or no spikes. They're wearing power armor. So hearing about that in a part of the world that's not normally covered, like, okay, what if you add even more constraints? What if you add lower player base? What if you add supply issues? What if you add that there's nobody there because there's a GT, or not nobody there, but there's a GT going on that's going to pull a lot of those players away? What emerges after that? I know I talked about before playing in South Korea, looking at South Korea, seeing what's played there. I have to learn what Tyranids are. I have not played in the last two places I've lived. Tyranids have not been popular, and I scrolled through their photos. Somebody has a Biotitan. I have not seen a Biotitan in person, and that scares me. And they're like, "Oh, that's okay. I have the dragon thing too." I'm like, "Oh, cool." So I have to learn what
Oh
those
wow.
are, and like that emerging meta there. We're like, "Oh, Tyranids are really popular here. I guess I better like I have to tech for Tyranids now." That's not something I've ever had to do. All right, so let's give it a shot. So that's why I wanted to talk a little bit about about that RTT and say like, "Oh, hey, this is what this looks like."
And that's super interesting. It's like what Taos said. You're kind of looking out for, so in my meta, for example, I'm looking out for players. Now, if I hear a player has pulled in, has gone like, I know a very good Marines player. He's got the best in South Pacific last year. He'll pull out to he's pulled out and picked up Tau now. So I'm like, okay, now instead of him having to play him with his Marines, who's a very good Marine player, I now have to worry about him playing one of the best factions. Now, I've always been fortunate enough to have one of the best AdMech players. You know, I could arguably say in Australia, easily one of the best in the state for sure. And so AdMech have always felt strong for me, even in 8th edition, because he was such a good player. But where like locally, now I get a lot of shit for this, pardon my French, off of my
One
mates,
for
but
the
there's
episode.
never really been many good Tyranid players around here. Now I play Tyranids. So like I've always made a dig saying don't have to worry about any of the Tyranid players. And apart, and just making digs at them. But I honestly have until Octarius, where was when I unpacked my nids out of the box again. There was no, I didn't have to worry about Tyranids like you. Never really had to worry about them because they never were a thing. And if they were played by players who didn't play enough to become really proficient with them. So
That's the thing, though, right? Like, we got to all tech for our own little metas. It's funny how, like, even though, so Ben and I, for example, are like 5-6 hours away. We also normally our big prominent players, they do play Tyranids. So we have a big Tyranid scene in the big bugs. And I like to think maybe I might be one of them, maybe when I get the chance to play them. So it's just funny. There's each of our local metas and then it's so different from each other. And those time constraints and like financial constraints and just a fundamentally availability really constricts that even more. So, and I like to think when we cover more tournaments moving forward, you'll see that throughout. So, yeah. I guess so. From here, so that's sort of the tournament coverage we have, and so I guess to end the if you guys, so if you want to be part of the Best in Tabletop Network, in our Discord we have a lightning round, so some questions you can answer at the very end, or when you join us live, there'll be questions. So I think Mr. Towsey has some questions for us to answer that some lovely patrons have asked. So if you want to start reading them out, then we'll start answering them as best as we can.
Yeah, man. I am definitely organized and have found the correct chat because there are so many in this Discord. It's so great. Bear with for 1 second.
We should probably cover the rules for lightning round. They'll be the same
Great
as
idea. Great idea. Straight away. I think get in there, especially when it's like some of the people I'm not, going to mention too many names, Paul Winters, but you just got to be careful. Be careful of some of the questions that come out. As much as I love them, some of them probably aren't right, for a family audience.
Yeah, they lightning round questions do need to be appropriate, but the goal with this is for us not to dwell on them. As much as we all like talking about 40K, not necessarily the time for long-winded answers. So, Taos, if
Thanks
you
for
have them
reminding
ready to
me.
go, we can.
Yeah.
get this
So
knocked out.
right off the bat, we've got Jason asking, how do we play when the tables are all upside down? So yep.
So how do you guys do that? I
how-
do.
how
I
do we
would
do
like
that?
to know as the American.
Low
Well, so-
center of gravity.
Yeah. No, so our tables are all actually sponsored by Magnarack, and so you got magnets in the bottom of them. The
It's rolling dice, which is the issue.
yeah, you got to like stack a dice tower upside down and have them go. Yeah. Yeah.
Never enough.
Right. So what do we got going next? Let's put it in chat. But with so much of the 40K world discussion centered around North America, Northern Europe, how do your regions keep such a distinct meta? So do one of the Aussies want to go first?
Yeah, I'm more than happy to take this one. It's due to distance. Now, and goes off a couple of things we've touched upon in the podcast, I think. So we have a smaller player base, which is spread out locally. Things are more expensive, pulling from what Taos said. And you tend to find pockets of players. So my local store, there's a lot of Chaos players there. Now they've dropped off in the last year because it's been pretty underpowered for the poor guys. But honestly, I think it's because when you go to Queensland, there's just different players that always play that faction. It always feels like the meta's skewed, but all it is just generally the same kind of community in certain areas playing the same armies they played for X amount of years. So does that make any sense? Like kind of what I'm saying, it's kind of like it's just because it's not like in America where there's just players and players and players and players. There's just and people will hop ship because of cheaper produce. Like
That
over
was
here.
two, Ben.
Sorry.
that was two swears. You've taken one from somebody else.
Oh no.
Oh no. I'll take it off
Sorry.
Sam in that case. No, so it's just I think it's to do with player pool and distance. Some players don't travel. Some players just stay in their local store and play whatever plays there. If they have one GT a year, they'll just go to one GT a year. So
yeah, I'd actually like to answer this one too. Having lived in some more remote parts of the United States, it really does come down to availability and travel. Where I live now, I drive into so the part of New Mexico I live in, I have to drive into Texas to plan events. It's about hour 45, 2 hours away, and a time zone change. So I have to leave 3 hours before the RTT starts to make it there on time. That limits how many people can show up to something. And in a lot of places, there are budgetary constraints. The town I play in, which I'll name drop because I'm here, Stormcrow Games in Lubbock, Texas. Lubbock, Texas is a college town. That's where Texas Tech is. So, as I'm sure most of us can understand, playing 40K on a budget, that limits some of the armies. I have not seen a GSC player. I've seen one AdMech player, and he converted everything out of other things. So he had a extensive bits box, and that's how he made AdMech. So you see a lot of that with more remote metas. Because when people talk about North America, they're talking a lot of times about the big metro areas. Well, there's rural 40K too, and that builds its own meta there. So, again, jumping in for the token American comment.
But yeah, so it sounds like we've got similar answers. I might be answering for Ben here. But yeah, we've got populations like quite discreetly separated, and then things are expensive, and sometimes supply issues, right? So yeah, that'll force things into be their own wee pocket. So what was the next question we had here? Was do your metas have a better way to deal with problematic players?
Tough one.
Yes. Tough. I don't. So funnily enough, I don't know what the standard approach is for American players. Just blast them on Reddit and then hope for the best. I mean, but it's tough. So I mean, we've been very fortunate. So obviously, so I'm part of the Australian New Zealand committee, and obviously looking back at historical data, we've had very few and far between problematic players. So it's been very, very fortunate in that sense that haven't had to deal with it. And on the wider Australian scale, you just hear about players, but I mean, maybe that I'd like to think we're just it might be a cultural thing, maybe. But look, legitimately, we do have bad players, and so I don't know if we have an exact better approach, but maybe it's just, I guess, have an honest conversation with them sometimes. So I think the approach we sort of take as a national team or national committees from others is sort of have a conversation with the player and say, look, hey, by the way, we've heard this, this, and this. Just to let you know, we've seen a trend. Can you do X, Y, Z? Maybe improve, pull your head in a little bit. So improve along the way, and then I think worst case scenario there is sometimes bans implemented. So we have sometimes a national system. So some part of the community is sometimes like a state ban, or some tournament organizers may have a ban. So obviously not to throw under the bus. My understanding is Down 40K has never banned anyone, but from the circuit, we've banned that player from that circuit. And then from that region, from New South Wales, sometimes there's like fundamentally a 12-month ban on players from that region. And sometimes that does follow across other states, or sometimes players get a yellow card for that region. So anytime they attend an event in the region, there's already got that yellow card in advance. So it's sort of, I guess, a benefit for Australia in that although we're a massive country, we're all interconnected when we talk to each other, and that we're able to implement those stronger national bans potentially if needs be for the worst case scenario. So do we have a better answer? I don't know, but we have an answer per se, and it's worked so far. And hopefully, I guess, as sportsmanship and just general good human beings grow, I think hopefully we never have to enact on it too much.
Well, and I think that's it's an interesting question, and it's something that the wider 40K is trying to figure out too. There right now, there's not a magic bullet for a problematic player right now. Phrasing on that's not great, but you know what I mean. There's you identify a problem player, um, and you have to talk with them. That's really where it is. We're not. I'm gonna level with y'all. We're not a big enough game to just start banning people. Um, as terrible as that sounds, you got to talk with people, especially in these small areas. I know, if your meta is only 20 people and you ban somebody, now you got 19. Um, and that's not saying that, oh, you have to put up with them, you have to let them do what they want. No, you still hold them to account, but you have to talk with them. You got to be proactive. Um, we're adults playing with toy soldiers. Is what we're doing at the end of the day. And you have that conversation and say, this is, you need to chill, buddy. You need to clean this up. Again, I'm going to keep answering for Australia and New Zealand in a lot of this, so I can feel included until I move.
Yeah, there's probably a degree of things being self-correcting as well if like groups and metas or locations are small enough where there's not hiding amongst crowds. If everybody knows everybody, then maybe it's personal experience a little bit, but it's a lot harder to have problems.
No, I don't think it is. It is just a localized thing you said there, Taos. I think that that and you, Alex, as well, where you said you're not from Australia. It doesn't Australia, but you're talking about that rural thing, and I think that's something. The common thing that we've all said is it's quite rural. It feels it because it's a big area to cover, but small. A small percentage of people play it, if you like. So I think that the community has a lot to do with how you treat those people. Not just yourself. Like the other players have a lot to do with that because there's I've never had any really huge issues with people, but the issues I have had have almost been self-policed by the community themselves, and in a mature way, not like mob mob mentality kind of thing, but has generally been done quite maturely. And honestly, there's like players, I think also to a certain extent are hesitant to step out of line a little bit more when they know that their community is so small, because they also know I can't just go to the next store along and just play there. It kind of doesn't work that there's not enough stores. So I think that actually, prevents people from doing it a little bit more, maybe.
Alrighty. So maybe next question. So this is probably individual, I guess. Do each of your hosts prefer winning with jank or violence? So, anyone want to volunteer to go first? Or do I get a name?
Yeah, I guess I'll go first. I'm a bit sad in the sense I'm very formulaic and very like down the line. I'm not very too creative in the sense of things. I guess I'm a bit of background. I'm a bit of an accountant and finance by trade, so I'm very numbers. Just make it simple, make it I don't know, easy as possible. So I'm very. I'll sort of instead of violence, will be vanilla. So unlike the two of them together, so very very vanilla. But I'm in saying that I like to be the aggressor and be a bit more violent in the grand scheme of things. So yeah.
So is that vanilla or vanilla like Anthony and violence?
Okay,
yeah.
no thoughts.
Yeah. Alrighty. Better than when you said you were very sad, and I thought you were going to say you don't win. That would have been rough. All right, Ben. Which do you prefer?
I prefer jank because it usually means I've used my brain in a wrinkled way rather than the totally smooth way. So I've managed to actually use it. In saying that, there are some factions which incite pure bloodlust into me when I'm facing against them on the table. So like if I come up against most kind of elves, because I've actually historically my sparring partners over the few years, I'd say the majority of them play elves. So I've picked up quite a big bloodlust for them. But yeah, I enjoy using tricks and primary or just points to beat my opponent. I've never really played hypothetically a strong enough army to be tabling people all the time. So yeah, that's me.
So
What about you, Alex?
That's amusingly segued to me to some extent. Sam might want to unmute to be upset about this. But before switching to Custodes, I was on the Triple Megara train. And so with those 7 models, while it was fun to pull some level of jank, like there was one local guy who got real confused and then really appreciated what happened when I surfed his Nightbringer, bopped him for his 3 wounds, and then piled into something else so he couldn't hit back. Yeah, the Knights usually did violence. Right, Sam? Was that fun? Those TTS games?
I hate Megaras with a passion. I hope they go burn in hell.
Yeah, I had a good go at like terrorizing almost the whole country with them. And now they've gone up points. It's just in time for the Custodes I have a significantly larger collection of to get buffed. This is a wild ride. So I guess your last, Alex, which do you prefer?
Jank, I'm learning to win with violence. But having played Chaos for a while, we live off of jank. Even that might be violent jank, but it's still jank. Cloud of Flies is a great strat. I'm just saying that. Especially when you're slamming it down every turn, you're like, and you can't shoot this guy, can't shoot that guy. That's how I have to win games. Pro tip, Death Guard players, with your Volkite Contemptors, make sure you tag your target for that with a Plague Weapon first, and then you're going to pay 2 CP to reroll 1s to wound. And on something that does mortals on a 6 to wound, getting to reroll 1s is really good. It's just that's a hot tip from somebody who suffered through that codex for a year.
For like all of those many Death Guard players to appreciate.
It's great. It kills knights real good.
Alrighty. And I think we've got one last question, which is it's really important, and this might be specifically for the Aussies, from Nathan of Fight Club and his FLG article fame. What are drop bears, and do I need to buy repellent for them?
Are they even real?
Well, Nathan, What are you talking about? Of course they're real, Ben. Come on, buddy.
No,
Yeah.
no, Ben's just got really good repellent. That's why he doesn't know
Yeah.
that they're real.
There you go. So, unfortunately, Nathan, because you're a foreigner for Australia, there's no saving grace. And Alex, I mean, when you come visit Australia, I mean, just be on the lookout. I mean, they kill millions of tourists worldwide. I mean, the numbers have dropped a bit with COVID lately, so but be on the lookout. Like, there's no way to repel them.
They love the fresh blood, don't they?
Yeah, exactly right. So just be wary. Keep your senses as going as possible, and just don't be caught alone in the outback late at night. So yeah.
Well, look, lads, it's been a pleasure. I have to say, I hope we have managed to get through this. This is our first episode. I'm sure we'll get better and better as time goes on. So,
if anyone has any questions or advice for us on the show, obviously we're growing and developing. This is our very first episode, and the formula will get more refined. And so, if you have any words of wisdom or if you have any advice, all ears to hear them. So, yeah.
It's been a pleasure. Sam, I'm sure this is our Best in Tabletop Network overlords would appreciate one more plug if you can start pulling up all that information for us.
Yeah, sure. So again, if you guys want to support the network, patreon.com/Best in Table Network is the best place, and then join the Discord. $10 a month for it, $10 USD a month for it, and you'll get your value back almost straight away. So more than worth it. So yeah, and the next episode, the plan is to try and have an interview from one of the guys from the New Zealand Teams Championship, and then maybe some extra juicy content. So look forward to seeing us in about 2 weeks.
Fantastic. And we've actually got some other hopefully some other events happening locally to us to talk about, hopefully, as well, or at least ones that are impending. So hopefully we've got a bit more juicy stuff to talk about for that. So
until next time, thank you everyone. Have a good night.